Welcome to 18th Century Cooking. I'm your host, John Townsend, and today we're doing a super easy recipe. This is something you can do with your kids. It's very 18th century. These are called cracknels, or let's call them the 18th century version of crackers. Thanks for joining us today as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. So what are cracknels? Well, first I want to start off with an 18th century dictionary definition of cracknels. 18th century dictionaries are not like our dictionaries today. They're a little more concise, but this one's good. This one says cracknels, a sort of cakes baked hard so as to crackle under the teeth. So these are crackery, they crackle, right? Now, cracknels are old. They've been around for a long time in English cookery. Probably, they're probably 15th century, recipes for cracknels or something similar to them. And they certainly change throughout time. They get easier to make, thank goodness. But here is a fairly early one. This is like 1706 or something like that. This is the collection of 300 recipes. It's one of our cookbooks. The recipe here is to make cracknels. To a quart of flour, take a pound of butter, half a nutmeg grated. I like this one. I should actually have used this one. Half a nutmeg grated, the yolks of 4 eggs beat with 4 spoonfuls of rose water. Put the nutmeg and the eggs into the flour, wet it into a stiff paste with cold water. Roll in the butter. I have no idea what they mean there. Roll in the butter. Make them into shape. Okay, put them into a kettle of boiling water. This is weird. You put them into a kettle of boiling water. When they swim, take them out with a skimmer. Put them into cold water. When they harden, lay them out to dry and bake them on tin plates. So a lot of these early cracknels were put in water, boiled, in water first and then baked. Thank goodness that's not the one we're going to be doing. Kind of reminds me of pretzels or something like that. And this one's very rich. It's got rose water for aromatics along with nutmeg. Seems very confusing. Eggs and whatnot. We're going to be doing one out of the Rundell cookbook. This is one that's so much easier. So this is probably late 18th century. It's in versus 19th century, or early 18th century. To make cracknels, to a pint of blue milk, put about 2 ounces of butter, a good spoonful of yeast, make it just warm, mix it into as much flour as will make a light dough, roll it out very thin, cut it into long pieces 2 inches broad, prick them well, bake them in a slow oven upon tin plates. So much simpler, and there's no flavoring here, unlike what they were doing with some of these earlier ones, where they were putting spices in. Sometimes they put sugar in them. They do all kinds of things like that. These are just like saltines, right? This super plain. Seems to be more about texture than about flavor. And again, the definition in the dictionary, it was all about the crispness, wasn't it? Didn't say anything about flavor. So we're going to be trying to get this texture, which is a crackling, a cracker. So let's get started on this one. Again, this is super simple, and you can do it with the kids. We start off with a pint of blue milk. Easy, right? Blue milk. Okay, I'm taking a guess here, but I think it's a pretty educated guess. We're talking about skimmed milk. It gets referenced a lot in 18th century cookery. I'm not sure if I've seen a reference to blue milk very often, but obviously skimmed milk is sort of blue colored compared to that very opaque whole milk. But we need about a pint. I've got a pint here. And now we have just 2 ounces of butter. We're going to toss in a cold bit of butter here. If you had warm butter, that would make it a lot easier. So we want to get this just warm. We don't want to get it hot, and we don't want it to be cold because we're going to be adding yeast in here, and we want that yeast to continue to be active. We don't want it to cool off too much or get hot and kill it. But let's get this warmed up. Now it's time to mix our warm milk and butter with our flour. And I don't want to make a giant batch, so I'm going to kind of leave some of this behind. I mean, if we need it later on, we can do that. That's the nice part about some of these recipes. We really don't, we just add as much flour until we get to the right consistency, right? So we've got some flour already in the bowl here. We've got the, the question is nutmeg. That's the question. What? Okay, so in an earlier recipe I read, they had nutmeg in there, and I think we can get away with it in this recipe. I don't think anybody's gonna, fight us on that, or we're not gonna get in trouble. It said a whole half a nutmeg. We're not gonna do that. We don't want to go crazy. There you go. So let me add just a little bit more flour here. It says here, let's see. Oh yeah, I need the yeast too. While we're still in our nice liquid phase here. Yeast, I've just took some quick yeast and, mixed it with just an ounce or two of warm water and just let it set here. In the 18th century, they had liquid yeast from the brewer that they were going to be using for bread or whatnot. We can just use regular, like a third of a packet or whatever. We don't need a lot of yeast, just a little bit. Some of the recipes don't even have it, but we're definitely going to use that. Okay. And there we go. So obviously we can't roll this out yet. We need to add more flour. That's what I like about these 18th century recipes. It's just like, well, add flour until you get there. Okay. There we go. It's mixing up nicely. Dough is perfect. I know you're gonna say, oh, how much flour did you use, John? I have no idea, right? It's all about, just like the recipe, it's like add the flour until you get the right kind of consistency. Does it not stick to my fingers? Perfect. It's just exactly what we want here. Now we need to roll it out very, very thin. So let's get this floured up here and put that there. So we're gonna roll this out nice and thin. Again, there's a lot here. It's like a million crackers. So I probably will not bake all these. Although the nice part about crackers, of course, is that they can store, right? You can store them up and use them much later on. So maybe you do want to make a big batch because it's more efficient that way. And the way these are done actually is very reminiscent to something like hardtack. And if you're not familiar with hardtack, or as we call it in our episode, ship's biscuit, because it's that's really the 18th century term for them. It's similar. Now, it's a very, very simple dough. It doesn't even really have the salt in it or the butter or milk, right? So these are a little richer than a ship's biscuit, but very similar in how it's going to end up. Although these are going to be much more palatable, let me tell you. These are ready to start cutting out. And what does the recipe say? It says, roll out very thin, cut into long pieces 2 inches broad. Now, this kind of reminds me of saltine crackers in that they're kind of done in these little square pieces. And so we're going to cut out these 2-inch broad rectangles or whatever we see fit. Okay, these are rolled out nice and thin. I went ahead and poked them with our fork here so that they don't puff up too much. These are ready to go in the oven, and wow, we've got a choice here. We can do it sort of realistically. I'm gonna put these in at 350 and they'll probably take 15, 20 minutes. Again, we're looking for crispy, but it's not burnt. Most of these recipes really though are calling for a slow oven, a very low and longer cook. Really, we're just trying to get all the moisture out of here, but not like a ship's biscuit where that's basically all we're doing. So maybe if you want to try them the 18th century way, go for 300 degrees. They might take as long as 30 minutes. They might even take twice baking to get them as crispy as we want, but we're gonna try 350, 15 minutes. our crackers are out of the oven. We've let them cool down to room temperature. You want to let them cool or else they won't be crispy. And they look great. It took a little over 15 minutes for these. And some of the ones I had were a little thicker. These are the thinner ones. The thinner ones definitely, 15 minutes was good. If they're a little thicker, it might take a little bit longer. That's okay. They each have their own sort of, purpose in life. I went ahead and brought cheese out with these. But one of the interesting recipes says, from the 18th century, these are proper to eat with chocolate. So you could eat this with chocolate. Now, when they mean chocolate in the 18th century, they probably mean hot chocolate, like you would dip them in chocolate. We want to see exactly how these turned out, though. So we're going to try it first with nothing, and let's test them out. Oh yeah, that's exactly what we're looking for. Nice and crispy. Wonderful little flavor there. Definitely, we put in a little bit of salt. That wasn't necessarily in the recipe. For different, earlier ones, they had sugar in them. So, you can make sweeter ones. You can make them with a little flavor in them. This just has that hint of nutmeg to make them properly 18th century. Do they go well with something else? Well, here's a little bit of cheese. Sets that off perfectly, doesn't it? Gives you the two textures, nice and creamy, and then the crackle pop. Boy, these are fun. Some of the other recipes actually call for glazing them. So if you wanted to get something like, salt crystals that stayed up on top of them, they would get a little glaze with, let's say, an egg wash or something like that over the top of them. Definitely earlier recipes called for them to be in different shapes, not rectangles, but little round shapes or whatever. Isn't that like what, if we go to the store and buy crackers, you can get all kinds of crackers. Flavored ones, sweet ones, in different shapes. They did exactly the same thing with these. Yeah, and other folks here in the room, when they tried them out, they thought pita chip. And I think that is a great, again, connection. Isn't it interesting? Something very modern today connects up with something very 18th century, and we get them coming together. So this is a great recipe. Again, something super simple you can do with the whole family, have fun, and make them, experiment with them and make them just the way you want to make them. If you want another recipe that's a lot like this and sort of tied to it, that ship's biscuit hardtack, make sure to check out this episode.